And speaking about having to defeat the left in order to actually turn our attention to defeating China, here comes a story from what should be and was actually at one time the center of dreams and imagination and fantasy and wonder and joy in America and in much of the Western world. I am talking about the one and only Tinseltown, which is now really Rusttown, Hollywood. That magical fantasy place where any boy or girl with a great heart bursting with vision and enthusiasm could go and become anything he wanted. And the next Cary Grant, the next Grace Kelly, the next Cecil B. DeMille. I can't think of any producers or writers or sound editors or lighting people right off the top of my back, but you get the picture. Yes, from the land of Hollywood. Hollywood has now declared that they are going to slightly tweak the rules about what movies can and cannot be nominated for Best Picture. So, according to the Academy, this is the Academy's official website, Oscar.com. And this is what it says, okay? For the 96th Oscars 2024, a film must meet 2 out of 4 of the following standards to be deemed eligible for Best Picture. Standard A, on-screen representation, themes, and narratives. You guys knew where this was going. To achieve Standard A, the film must meet 1 of the following criteria. A1, lead or significant supporting actors. At least one of the lead actors or significant supporting actors is from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. Asian, Hispanic, Black, African American, Indigenous, Native American, Alaskan Native, Middle Eastern, North African, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, other underrepresented race or ethnicity. Yeah, I noticed that they didn't have any Indigenous Australians in there. So that's probably why other underrepresented race or ethnicity. Or maybe that's because now that no one really knows what sex they are, they can just arbitrarily declare that they are, you know, some made-up letter after the letter Z. Other people stop with a Z, but not me, as Dr. Seuss said. Maybe now they think people will do the same thing with ethnicities. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if people started doing that. It's a logical continuation of what we have had. So maybe that's kind of their, that's them covering themselves ever so cleverly. That's A1. A2, general ensemble cast. At least 30% of all actors in secondary and more minor roles are from at least 2 of the following underrepresented groups: women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. Now, I'm wondering, could you maybe kill 2 birds with 1 stone? So, for example, instead of having at least representing 2 of these groups, could you maybe combine them? You know, could you have a group of lesbian women who are in wheelchairs, motorized wheelchairs? You know, could they just be all of the secondary characters, kind of like a Greek chorus? You know, in which case, would it be all right if it wasn't a solid 30%, maybe 23%? Because, you know, they wanted to make 30%, but there just weren't enough Black lesbians in wheelchairs to reach that magic number, unless you wanted to paint a bunch of people in blackface, and then, you know, there's that, you just open up that can of worms. So I would be curious what the Academy would say about that. A3, main storyline or subject matter. The main storyline, theme, or narrative of the film is centered on an underrepresented group, including women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ, people with cognitive or physical disabilities, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. Now, that's just standard A, gang. That's 1 tier that a movie can check off in order to be eligible for Best Picture. But then there are several other standards beneath A. There is, for example, Standard B, Creative Leadership and Project Team. To achieve Standard B, the film must meet 1 of the following criteria. B1, creative leadership and department heads. At least 2 of the following creative leadership positions and department heads. Casting director, cinematographer, composer, costume designer, director, editor, hairstylist, makeup artist, producer, production designer, set decorator, sound, VFX supervisor, writer are from the following underrepresented groups: women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. At least one of those positions must belong to the following underrepresented racial or ethnic group: Asian, Hispanic, Black, Indigenous, Native American, Middle Eastern or North African, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, or other underrepresented group or ethnicity. So 2 of those groups have to belong to an underrepresented group, and at least one of those positions has to belong to a minority, racial, or ethnic group. And I'm just kind of really curious. I mean, does it really make much of a difference if your hairstylist for a movie is some sort of transgender queer chick? A pseudo chick? I mean, really, I'm trying not to be crass or gross. I'm seriously trying to understand this. Really? Are LGBTQ people, or are, I don't know, Pacific Islanders such a different species from Caucasians or Europeans, people from European descent, that being the hairstylist of a movie will suddenly give it an entirely new look and vision? Really? And that actually leads to another question, but we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so that was B1. B2, other key roles. At least 6 other crew, team, and technical positions, including production assistants, are from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. These positions include, but are not limited to, first AD, gaffer, script supervisor, etc. B3, overall crew composition. At least 30% of the film's crew is from the following underrepresented groups: women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. Then there's Standard C, gang. I know, this thing keeps going. Standard C, industry access and opportunities. To achieve Standard C, the film must meet both criteria below. C1, the film's distribution or financing company has paid apprenticeships or internships that are from the following underrepresented groups and satisfy the criteria below: women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities, or who are deaf or hard of hearing. The major studios distributors are required to have substantive, ongoing paid apprenticeships, internships, inclusive of underrepresented groups in most of the following departments: production, development, physical production, post-production, music, VFX, acquisitions, business affairs, distribution, marketing, and publicity. C2, training opportunities and skills development for the crew. The film's production, distribution, and/or financing company offers training and/or work opportunities for below-the-line skill development to people from the following underrepresented groups: women, racial, ethnic group, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't even read you the whole thing, but I see that I've been reading from Oscar.org for almost 9 minutes. So I am going to cut it off right there, and my gosh, gang, what can you even say to this? Because there are so many things, and I just want to start this by saying this. If you Google movies who won Best Picture or something, you are going to see a radically diverse group of movies. Just to name a few of them: The Sting, Gone with the Wind, Ben-Hur, Gladiator, Braveheart, Lord of the Rings, The King's Speech, A Beautiful Mind, Rocky, Patton, A Man for All Seasons, Marty, Driving Miss Daisy. You might have recognized some of those titles, and others you might be thinking, oh, whoa, what? Marty? What the heck is that? The point, however, is that in the past, movies were judged by their story. They were judged by their artistic merit. They were judged, by all of these different criteria that actually had to do with the movie itself, with the art of filmmaking, with the art, to get even more basic, to the art of storytelling. Now, however, that has been shucked all out the window. Forget about a diverse group of directors, writers, producers, and storytellers with different visions, telling different stories to the utmost of their ability. Forget about all that. I mean, gosh, what do you want to live in? The 1950s now? This is 2020. We're a newly racially segregated society, don't you know? So race and sexuality and gender are the only things that we can actually look at the world. I also am very, very, very interested. This is just a side note that I just realized. Why did the Academy say women were an underrepresented group? Don't they just mean female identifying persons? Because don't they know that not all women are actually women? And then that raises an interesting question because, and it's the same question that I've raised before, if transgender women are in fact women, the same as biological women, then why are they trans women? Which means, why are they part of this LGBTQIA plus minority? Why do we even have the T in LGBT? That was just a little aside. My apologies. But the main point is that diverse directors, producers, writers with diverse visions and ideas telling different stories, that's now a thing of the past. The Academy pretty much plunged a stake into that heart. And they ain't gonna take it out ever, ever, ever again. Now, if you're a director, or if you aspire to become a director, and you had dreams of winning a Best Picture nomination, you're not going to be able to do that unless you basically allow yourself to be blackmailed into following these absolutely ridiculous, asinine, totalitarian requirements. Because that's what they are. Just to lay it out all on Front Street. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we're not going to be getting stories anymore, gang. Now, and look, not every Best Picture is your cup of tea, right? I fully acknowledge that. There have been some movies, for example, a good example, Titanic. Oh my gosh, I've only seen it once. You might call me a typical guy. I cannot stand that movie. I cannot stand the sappiness. I cannot stand the historical inaccuracies that are more than just historical accuracies, because they actually stain the reputation of people who actually lived, okay? Who are actually, yes, truly on board the Titanic when she sank. Cannot stand Titanic. Cannot absolutely stand it. But, if you're like me and you don't like Titanic, you could comfort yourself. You know, if you were alive back then, or if you're looking back on the internet and looking at all the movies that won Best Picture, and you get to that and you're like, what? That won Best Picture? Who the heck made that decision? You can comfort yourself with the fact that, okay, so in my opinion, a really lousy movie pulled the wool over enough people's eyes and it won Best Picture. It's not the end all and be all of the world, because, you know, just a few years later, Gladiator won Best Picture. Who doesn't love Gladiator? Or even more, who doesn't love Lord of the Rings? I love those movies. I seriously, genuinely love those movies. So you could see that they were different movies. There were different themes. There were different genres, different directors, different stories. I mean, just everything. Everything. It was diverse. Yes, you won some, like Titanic. You lost some, I should say, like Titanic. And you won some, like Lord of the Rings, or The Sting, or A Man for All Seasons, or Ben-Hur, or all movies like that. Now, however, we're not going to have that, because we're not going to have different, diverse movies. Instead, what we're all just going to get is propaganda. Because if you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, which doesn't even affect sometimes the story. Or which actually does. They all affect the story. They all affect the story. Because now what they're saying is that your story has to be about this. You have to have these sorts of characters in here. You know, the theme or the narrative line has to be like this. Or in the background, behind the camera, it has to be like this. It has to be like this. And if you don't listen to those people, then obviously they're going to complain and your picture will be disqualified from even being considered for the best picture. So there's that. Third, and a big deal for me, all historical pieces that want a chance at the best picture, okay, will actually have to use the 1619 mentality and basically rewrite history in order to fit the new parameters that the Academy has put in. I mean, if A Man for All Seasons, which is about Sir Thomas More during the time of Henry VIII and his divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, to marry his second wife, Anne Boleyn, before he had her beheaded on charges of, I think it was treason and witchcraft. Classics, those two. If someone tried to make A Man for All Seasons today, it wouldn't even be considered for Best Picture. Because it takes place in, let me think here, 16th century England. So, there are no racial minorities. The storyline doesn't have anything to do with minorities. There are no LGBTQ people hovering in the background. There are no Pacific Islanders, you know, walking around the streets of London, rubbing elbows with a 16th century Englishman. So in that case, if someone really wants to bring that story back to the screen, because that movie was made the second part of the 60s, so you could say, yeah, I want to make that movie again. I want to bring it back, do my own version of it, my own version of Robert Bolt's play, because it was originally a play. Then you either are true to the play, true to the historical time that the play takes place in, that the story takes place in, or you completely butcher the story and the time period because you really, really want that Oscar gold. You really, really want it. Those are the only two choices that you have. And a lot of people, you know, they're ambitious. They want to win awards like everyone else. I understand that. But the temptation is going to be, yeah, we can tweak this, we can tweak this, we can change that, which then is going to feed back in giving us an entirely warped view of history. It will be making the past like the present. So we won't even have a past, present, and a future, or we'll all be a continuous now, which is actually what totalitarian societies do, come to think of it. So there's that, because if you don't do that, then you're not even going to be considered for that Oscar. And then finally, and perhaps most basically, imaginations are going to rust away to nothing. Anyone can fill in pre-written requirements, gang. Anyone can do that. Oh yeah, you know, I just fit this in here, I fit this in there, I fit this in there, I fit that in there. Oh, voila, there we go. I've got it. Anyone can do that. Anyone can. It takes a little bit more to actually create a story, to tell a story, and to bring that story onto the stage. It's not like writing, which is, I mean, challenging enough. But if you're in the movie business, not only do you have to, in many cases, write the story, but then you have to figure out how to actually take that story that is on the printed page and then bring it into the real world, bring it onto the screen. Now, that takes a little bit more. That takes imagination. That takes a very thriving, healthy imagination. And what we're doing here is that we are conditioning ourselves to basically kill our imaginations, to strangle them. Because just because a movie wins Best Picture doesn't mean that it's the best movie that was made that year. I've already ranted a little bit about Titanic and what I think about that. And if you love Titanic, wunderbar, you know, leave your comments telling me what a jerk I am down below. But I would be interested in hearing why you like Titanic. But it still required, this is where I was going to go with this, lost my train of thought there for a second. But pictures that win the Academy Award for Best Picture, movies that win the Best Picture Oscar, they are still heralded as the greatest movies of all time. Doesn't mean that they're always remembered, but they're sort of the high watermark. They're the gold standard. So with these new requirements, what the Academy is going to be telling future filmmakers, future storytellers, is that this is the gold standard. Doesn't matter about your imagination, doesn't matter about your vision, doesn't matter about your story, your characters, or anything else that you bring to the table. All that matters is this faux goal of representation. And if I could just make one more point. Well, first of all, and that's going to continually, cycle in and of itself and perpetuate itself until we're a bunch of grunting morons, even more so than we are now as a society, and we're not going to be able to make any sort of story that's heralded or praised or provoking and thoughtful that doesn't reflect these conditions. And so when they say that it's thought-provoking, daring, insightful, and everything, they're going to be lying. It's going to be just more propaganda because it will be the same thing as has happened 20 other times before. And that's what the Academy has done. That's what the Academy has done. Which is a big deal, but you can't help but feel that at a time, again, when China has now the biggest navy in the world, this is actually what we're worried about. We're worried that 30% of the crew behind the camera, people that you never even see, that the average moviegoer never even sees, has to be from some sort of racial minority. Our priorities are skewered. That is story number 2.